on the appeal of the court's order.
Heidi Roots. Alex Roots. Got 8 minutes. Let's see. Denise Lanier. Thank you. Aaron Adams. Thank you. And Dana Weaver. Thank you.
I apologize in advance. I'm getting over a summer cold. Good morning. I am Heidi Roos, Principal and Director of Air Quality and Greenhouse Gas Services Division with PCR Services Corporation. PCR has been providing consulting services related to CEQA for over 35 years, and I personally bring over 20 years of expertise in the fields of air quality impact assessments and risk management. We have been retained to review the air quality technical studies performed by Granite Construction's consultants. Independent of our review, the South Coast Air Quality Management District also submitted written comments to the draft EIR, which mirrored many of our observations, that the applicant's analysis underestimates the true impact to air quality. I will draw attention to the most important points given my limited time to speak. In the EIR, Granite Construction acknowledges that the pollutant emissions from the project will continually degrade the city of Temecula's air quality from what is relatively good air quality at approximately 40% of the health protective standards to within 97% of the threshold. This means, according to Granite's assessment, that Liberty Quarry alone will more than double the level of air pollution. However, it should be noted that the applicant prepared modeling studies utilize methodologies which are inconsistent with AQMD guidance as well as standard engineering practices. The applicant's methodology tends to downplay the magnitude of these air quality impacts, which will be far worse than those presented in EIR. Typically, air quality impacts are determined by taking the existing baseline level and adding a project's incremental increase in ambient pollution and comparing this to a health protective standard or threshold. In our opinion, Granite Construction in their analyses artificially reduced the baseline. One of several ways the baseline level was reduced is by systematically discarding data that represent maximum ambient levels, even though this data is real and verified by the AQMD. In other words, the baseline level was manipulated by choosing a relatively clean monitoring station and then discarding the top 5 highest concentrations. It is our professional opinion this was done to remove data to give the appearance that air quality impacts of Liberty Quarry will be below the standard, again, within 97%. Greenhouse gases. The project would result in an additional 80,000 tons of greenhouse gases per year, yet the project level impacts were deemed less than significant based on a qualitative threshold. A survey of air pollution control agencies throughout the state with the promulgated numeric threshold shows that a project the size of Liberty Quarry would be considered significant in places like San Diego County, the San Francisco Bay Area, San Joaquin Valley, and of course here in the South Coast Air Basin. The applicant cherry-picked less stringent guidance from the Sacramento AQMD instead of using this region's AQMD threshold to disguise its significant greenhouse gas emissions impacts. The county should rely on the South Coast AQMD threshold for Liberty Quarry, since Liberty Quarry would be a substantial industrial source requiring a permit from the South Coast AQMD, not Sacramento. Third point is that the project will emit pollutants for which the basin is classified as non-attainment in excess of regional thresholds. Yet the EIR concluded that the project would not result in a significant regional impact. The regional impact analysis improperly relies on these points. Truck reduction, which you've just heard about. Even though the county clearly states that all of the conclusions in the EIR are made assuming the proposed project will add new additional truck travel, and the EIR determined that there would be increased truck traffic, the discussion related to regional air quality improperly relies on reduced truck traffic to reach a conclusion of less than significant impacts. Mitigation. Granite has recently proposed new mitigation in an attempt to convince the public that the trucks traveling to the site will not increase pollution in the region. This mitigation measure will simply require all trucks visiting the site to meet 2007 emission standards. However, by the time this project is constructed and fully operational, the majority of trucks, well over 80% in the statewide fleet, will already meet 2007 emission standards. Therefore, this mitigation measure is simply business as usual and does not really do much to reduce truck pollution. In addition, regardless of how advanced the mitigation measures being implemented, an increase in trucks will result in an increase in miles and an increase in emissions. Thirdly, offsets. Granite Construction paying for offsets does not guarantee in any way to reduce regional emissions to Riverside County. Emission offset credits are generated when an existing business somewhere in the basin reduces emissions, but not necessarily in Riverside County. In summary, excuse me, Granite Construction has marketed that it will create better regional air quality, which is patently false. My final point today is that the EIR concludes that the no project alternative creates more pollution than the reduced footprint alternative. In the alternative analysis, the EIR states that pollutant emissions would increase if land is left in its rural state, the no project alternative. And the construction of homes on the land would result in impacts similar to Liberty Quarry. Both of these assertions are patently untrue. The no project alternative results in no new emissions, and residential development was shown in Temecula's annexation EIR to result in substantially lower impacts than a large aggregate mining operation. Granite Construction's assertion is not only patently untrue, it is illogical. It should be obvious that a large quarry with 1,600 trips per day will result in far more pollution than a small residential development. And for the county to rely on Granite Construction's flawed and unsubstantiated claim of reduced truck trips to make the determination that the alternative reduced footprint is better than no project once again completely contradicts the county's responses to comments that states, and I quote, "All of the conclusions in the draft EIR are made assuming that the proposed project will result in new additional truck traffic." Based on evidence you've heard from other experts, the project would be better located in San Diego County to reduce air pollution within this region, as well as health impacts to the local population. In conclusion, I would like to return to the question of particulate matter emissions and mitigation for Granite Construction to implement its own monitoring system. The reason for this is that the applicant currently operates a much smaller quarry in San Diego County called Rosemary's Mountain. According to that EIR, maximum particulate matter emissions were expected to be 95% of the numeric thresholds and concluded that the quarry would result in less than significant impacts. However, recent monitoring reports performed by Granite's consultant and available on their website demonstrates that PM10 emissions generated on-site exceed the clean air standard 7 to 9% of the time during the last 2 years, contradicting predictions in the EIR. Liberty Quarry will be nearly 5 times larger than Rosemary's Mountain. Based on this example, you can imagine what type of dust impacts Liberty Quarry may generate. And finally, please note that Granite Construction's consultants have not presented to you, the public, the true magnitude of the air quality impacts. Their modeling and methodologies, in our opinion, purposefully omits data to create results that minimize impacts. Therefore, any adoption of the statement of overriding considerations today would in actuality need to override impacts far worse than what is presented to you in the EIR by Granite Consultants.
Thank you. Ron. Commissioner Snell.
On the Rosemary Mountain example that you cited, predictions haven't panned out to what's actually been measured. It sounds like, you had a statement that there's 7 to 9% be exceeded. Does that correlate to what was predicted, or?
No.
So they had predicted they would never exceed it.
Right, they said they'd be 95% just based on mass emissions in San Diego County, their first level of screening. They said we didn't exceed this much tonnage per year, per day of PM emissions, so they didn't even do any modeling. So they were within 95% of a standard that should be overly conservative, overly health protective. And yet, consistently for the last 2 years, they have exceeded, with their own monitoring data, they have exceeded the standard.
And then you said we can imagine, but I would rather than me imagining what the impacts would be, have you looked at those trends and translated what would happen
I would need to know production levels. At Rosemary Fountain, I don't know that. So
It's not available on the website?
Not that I could easily find. Probably, trade secrets.
No,
Yeah, no,
it's funny they show that stuff and not simple stuff like how much it is. Yeah, okay.
And there's other differences. There's the wind, there's the distance to the fence line. So it's not easy to extrapolate from one to another. Simply looking at a permitted level that is 1/5 the size of Liberty Quarry at max production.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bennett?
You certainly talked about the truck traffic and how that impacts air quality. So if we have a bad baseline for truck trips, air quality is going to be flawed as well. I mean, it's a fair statement, right?
Absolutely.
So you rely on, or somebody, whoever does air quality analysis, has to rely on a valid traffic analysis.
Absolutely, that's a cornerstone of air quality analysis. So much of development projects are mobile source emissions. This has a serious stationary source component also, since they're producing their own power on site, but absolutely, transportation is a huge regional issue. They struggle with it at the port, you're struggling with it here. We need good data, and we absolutely have to have valid data to evaluate this completely.
Let's talk about the blasting issues. I don't know if you got into that in a very extensive way, but there's been a lot of talk about the blasting that they would do would not translate into harmful air quality impacts. We know that the prevailing wind is critical to this analysis, but talk about blasting if you can. What kind of analysis that you've done just with the blasting, and what would be released with the blasting, and how that could affect the average citizens of Temecula?
Unfortunately, I don't, for this round of response, sort of reading the response to comments, we kind of focused on these issues, but we have absolutely looked at blasting. Part of the annexation EIR, we looked at it ourselves, and blasting in general is a serious concern. I mean, you're taking dirt, you're throwing it up in the air by force. That's exactly the point of blasting, and the location of the proposed Liberty Quarry is exactly upwind of the prevailing winds. So to me, it's like at the beach when you pick up your towel at the end of the day and you whip it, and all that sand just blasts the poor person next to you. We've all been part of that. That's essentially what blasting is going to do. It's going to take that and just put it right into the wind and transport it to, what is a fairly populated area with a unique agricultural resource beyond that. So, not sure if it's been studied completely, but it definitely is a concern.
All right, well, my hope is that we have the applicant's rebuttal and bring back, I was suggesting a different type of format here, which would have allowed us to maybe gotten into more of a deeper conversation of air quality as well. And hopefully we'll have that opportunity.
Absolutely. I'll review the studies that were done, and there are some mitigation measures about when to not allow blasting, and we'll take a deeper look at that and talk about it next time.
Commissioner
Question. Yes. I'd like to ask county geologist two things. Mr. Kyle noted twice that there were going to be 2 blasts per day at the site. My understanding is a maximum of 1. Is that correct?
You are correct, 1 blast per day.
Okay, and I'd like to settle this, if you're familiar with it. What type of blasting will occur? What will happen? Is there going to be sand thrown into the air, as the speaker has just?
No, the blast designs will not be allowed to have blowout like that. That is the intent of the design, that it would not eject material into the atmosphere as she's described.
There will be nothing that will escape into the air.
There will be dust that does raise from the blast, but it is not this blasting of sand out across the countryside.
Okay, then in applicant's rebuttal, I'd like a little bit more detail on that.
I mean, any movement of soil results in dust being trained. I understand what you're saying, and I didn't mean to overstate that it's going to be
Sure, a truck going over the dirt.
Yeah, I mean, driving to the site releases dust.
But I want a comparison on that.
Okay, Commissioner Scarlett, good. Okay, is your concern over, in general, all types of pollutants, NOx, SOx, CO?
Yeah.
PM10, PM2.5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or is there any one in particular that you believe is more of a critical pollutant in this particular project with respect to air quality?
It's both the NOx, which is a precursor to ozone formation, and we have the dirtiest air in the nation. When you look at ozone standards, we continue, although we've made great progress as an air basin. So NOx as a precursor to ozone formation is a very serious issue. And development, you know, when you want a growing economy, you know, you have to allow a certain amount of growth in these pollutants. But this project is a significant source of NOx. And then there's the particulate, the dust, whether it's PM10, PM2.5, which is a subset of PM10, both of those are serious considerations of this project also.
Okay. The PMs are usually characterized as silica dust. Now, I think the geologist just said there's not going to be much going into the air. What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the silica, there's a lot of controversy around silica, and there are some, you know, studies out there showing that it's, some people feel it's more harmful than the state recognizes. So I understand there's a controversy on silica. That's not the primary concern I have. It's a particulate matter of any variety, which is a lung irritant, which can increase asthma in young folks. That is, you know, just a serious health issue unto itself. So it's not necessarily the toxic component of the dust.
Well, with respect to the PM pollutants and the airflow across the mine's surface, where do you expect any of those pollutants to end up?
If they follow the prevailing winds, it'll be into the valley and onto houses, schools, and possibly beyond to the agriculture, the wine country. There's, you know, potential loading. These things haven't really been studied in depth, and we've made those comments in our written materials. And that with the dust in particular, you know, it loads. It loads in the soil. It loads on the agriculture. It can reduce photosynthesis. It can interfere with the invertebrates that pollinate. And there's a lot more that maybe should and could have been studied on the dust impacts.
Is there some maximum distance that this might travel? Or what?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of site-specific meteorological data, and that's true of a lot of places. We don't really usually have the luxury. A big project like this has been going on for years. It's possible to set up a MET station, a meteorological station that would collect wind speed and distance. So we're using data that is available at some distance to this site and sort of anecdotal evidence, and that's just true of most modeling studies. So we're not precisely sure how far out the impacts would be. Zero.
Okay, my understanding is that San Diego State has air quality and there are at least some wind monitoring and other experiments on their reserve. And have you even talked to them about that?
Oh, extensively, yeah, absolutely. So.
Okay, all right, but they should be able to tell you where the wind is and how much the prevailing wind speeds are, the directions and everything else. Can you extrapolate from that where the pollutants will go then? Obviously, they're coming into the valley somewhere, but based upon the prevailing winds, excuse me, you would think they would go in one particular place more than others.
Winds change every day, and they change by season. I'm not being difficult. I'm just explaining that it's hard to say. You know, off the shore, from the shore, it switches around in a day. Different during the winter, during summer, there are, you know, extreme wind events, and so wind shifts quite a bit. And so there is a prevailing wind direction the modeling will use all of that data and then sort of predict the prevailing direction in which the impacts go, which tend to be down into Temecula.
Okay, I have one other. That is, you said that the applicant used figures from the Sacramento air quality district. Is that correct?
Yeah, in response to comments that we made about this qualitative standard for project level, the Sacramento APCD was quoted as the rationale for using it and not using South Coast AQD's quantitative threshold.
Can you characterize the difference in what results might have come out of it then if you use Sacramento versus South Coast air quality measures?
It gets to disclosure under CEQA that, again, the EIR does say at a cumulative level it's significant and avoidable, but does not also declare that at a project level. And under every other quantitative threshold that I cited, it should also be a project level significant. And then mitigation kicks in, things like that.
Okay, but that, what would be the net effect, I guess is what I'm getting at, if you use one set of figures from the Sacramento Basin and figures from the South Coast Basin?
It's simply disclosure. It's a disclosure level under CEQA in which at a project level, the EIR claims it's not significant, and we're saying that that should be a significant impact disclosed.
If you use the local South
Yes.
Coast air quality?
Exactly.
Okay, so that you haven't quantified it in any way?
Well, it's a 10,000 metric ton for an industrial source. Basically, the South Coast AQMD promulgated a threshold that says if they are the lead agency on an industrial project, because it doesn't have any other lead, they're the lead agency of the orphan projects that don't need CEQA under any other jurisdiction, then they would use 10,000 metric tons per year as their significance threshold at a project level. And they promulgated that a few years ago. Now, lead agencies are not obligated to use it, but it is directly applicable to an industrial source such as this. Simply, the county are the lead agency. So we're just putting out, with lack of promulgated standards by the county, we would recommend using what the South Coast AQMD suggests, and that we should be disclosed.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. I think that's it. Okay, Mary Ann Edwards. We'll have 6 minutes and we find 2 people. Christine Demko, ready, and Tamara Irwin. Thank you. That's 6 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Today I'm speaking as a 24-year resident concerned about our quality of life, our clean air, open space, and all the things that make Temecula such a great place. Many claims have been made about this project. We're being told that if the quarry isn't built, we will lose sales tax revenue, 99 jobs, the claimed revenue to the state teachers' retirement fund, though no agreements have been signed or established, and that the contrived shortage of aggregate will worsen. But the threat of losing these things assumes that if this project is not approved at this location, that no open pit mine will be opened anywhere. Of course, that won't be the case. Granite Construction didn't become a multi-billion-dollar corporation by being timid or non-competitive. They'll find another location for an open pit mine. And since San Diego County electeds have limited their county to 1 open pit mine, it's highly likely that Riverside County will continue to be the county of choice for open pit mining in the state of California. The proponents have compared this open pit mine to sites in Indio and Napa. However, those mines are surface mines where scooping is the activity of the day, not blasting. Those mines are located away from civilization, away from people, and not downwind. The Liberty Quarry would be located in the middle of the Rainbow Gap wind corridor with 350,000 residents downwind in the Temecula Valley, hardly similar to Indio or Napa. Let's think about this a different way. Would you consider approving this project in the middle of the Santa Rosa Plateau, or the Agua Tibia Wilderness, or along the Santa Ana River, or in the middle of Lake Matthews Reserve, adjoining the boundary of Idlewild, perhaps? These are all treasured resources in Riverside County, but it could be argued that the proposed site of this huge open pit mine is even more environmentally, ecologically, and culturally sensitive. Imagine a 1 mile wide, 1,000 foot deep open pit mine, asphalt plant, concrete plant, and power plant sharing a boundary with the pristine Santa Margarita Ecological Reserve. Or the giant hole bored in the earth adjacent to the last free-flowing wild river in Southern California, next to the Santa Margarita River Gorge, which has remained virtually unchanged for thousands of years. Imagine this 1,000-foot deep, mile-wide hole obliterating the MSHCP's only wildlife corridor connecting the coastal range with the Palomar Range. Imagine a lighted football stadium on that pristine mountaintop, lighting the night skies above Mount Palomar, home to the historic Palomar telescope that discovered the Hale-Bopp comet. If you arrived this morning around 8 a.m., you were treated to what we see every morning throughout the year, the fog pouring through that rainbow gap. It was as if it had drawn a line, and that's exactly how that wind tunnel works. You saw also the fog spreading out throughout the valley to the east. It comes through the gap, and then it spreads out as the wind patterns spread out. I couldn't have scripted a more perfect example of the rainbow gap effect than what we saw this morning. Temecula. It's a Lusitania word that means sunshine through the mist. Now imagine a giant 1 mile across, powdery, dusty hole with thousands of trucks going round and round and round and round, throwing up that dust. Imagine that same giant hole being blasted every day, throwing up even more dust. Now imagine that giant hole in the middle of the Rainbow Gap, the giant funnel straight to the beach that brings our winds, which exceed 30 and 40 miles per hour on a daily basis. Finally, imagine the beautiful fog that we saw this morning. Was that dust being thrown up by thousands of trucks daily? Explosions spread out across Temecula Valley. Will it cover our residents, our schools, our beautiful wine country? A $600 million a year jewel in Riverside County. Imagine the impact of that dusty wind will have on one of the few remaining areas of Southern California that has clean air and blue skies. Temecula, sunshine through the mist, not sunshine through the silica dust. And perhaps the most significant reason of all that this huge open pit mine should never be allowed to desecrate the mountaintop south of Temecula. Would you approve this project in the Garden of Eden, or in Gethsemane, or Bethlehem, or on top of the Dome of the Rock? The huge open pit mine will be dug in the middle of the Pechanga tribe's most sacred place, where civilization began more than 10,000 years ago. It's their Garden of Eden. How could we even consider such a thing? For 99 jobs? For sales tax? For corporate profit? Common sense and decency tells me that for all the reasons I've outlined here, this open pit mine should never be approved at this location. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever.
You got lucky. There apparently weren't any questions for you. Jeff Comachero, and you'll have 10 minutes. Chris White, you, Eric Jones, you, John DeGange, thank you, Michael Hessen, thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Roth and Commissioners. My name is Jeff Comachero, and I'm in my 14th year on the Temecula City Council. On behalf of the City of Temecula, I'd like to thank you for providing us this opportunity for our team to make this presentation this morning, and once again for holding these hearings here in our city, where those most affected can have a substantial opportunity to come and be heard. In order for you to make your decision as to whether or not to permit this enormous mining operation, you obviously must have the facts. For the better part of 6 years now, Granite Construction has been filling the heads of everyone, not with facts, but with their own fabricated information. They have to in order to gain approval, because they know full well that if you had the facts, the real facts, there's no other decision that you can come to other than denial of this application. They've done their job very well. So well, in fact, that their well-funded PR campaign has managed to bury the facts and cover them up with layer upon layer of deceptive propaganda. Granite would love to have you believe that their EIR demonstrates what good stewards of the economy they will be, and how the world will be far better off with their 1,000+ foot deep hole in the ground, spewing dirt and silica dust, noise, and 1,600 daily truck trips. Many people have said that this process involves the largest and most contentious public hearing in Riverside County history. That's probably true. But what is also true is that this is the greatest attempt by any entity, large or small, to pull the wool over the collective eyes of the more than 2 million residents of our county. I, my colleagues, and the consultant team at the City of Temecula have been digging deep for the real facts in this matter, and what we have found again and again in terms of uncovering this deception is truly astounding. I don't have the allowable time here to pull back the curtain and reveal all of it, so I'll speak only to the 5 points that I believe are enough to demonstrate a pattern of deception that brings into question everything that Granite Construction has been telling us for so long. Long enough, in fact, that they hope we and you will believe it. Let's talk about air quality. Granite is quick to tell us that their environmental consultants took current readings, put the amount of additional pollution that they will generate on top of that, and want us to believe that the end result will still be under allowable limits. But this methodology is only as accurate as their baseline number. Granite's baseline number didn't even come from the project site. It came from completely different areas, like the Agua Tibia Wilderness in Escondido. So if you start with lower than what is real, you can demonstrate that you can put an awful lot more garbage into the air and still be under the legal threshold. If that doesn't offend you, it should. It certainly offends me. Let's talk about noise. Granite's consultant misrepresented the existing noise level conditions by making the false assumption that the current ambient noise levels are dominated by traffic-related noise from Interstate 15, and that noise levels imposed by Liberty Quarry upon neighboring rural residents would be indistinguishable from the ambient freeway noise. Again, they want us all to believe what sounds like a logical argument, until, of course, you investigate the truth. Not on behalf of Granite, but on behalf of our constituents. Actual noise monitoring instruments reviewed by the city's experts at the nearest resident to the quarry site determined that there was no freeway noise whatsoever. The actual reading of UR, or unrated, to the low 30 decibels is considerably lower than Granite's baseline of 39 decibels. So Granite is saying, don't worry about the blasting and other noise from our operations because it'll all be covered up by the non-existent freeway noise. I used to have a neighbor named Jack Lorraine. Always said the same thing when I returned home from a trip. He'd say everything was fine in the neighborhood. There was a big fire, but don't worry about it, because the huge flood put it out. I wonder if Granite's consultant spoke to Jack Lorraine. How about Granite's claim of a shortage of aggregate? This and the questionable claim of truck trip reduction make up the cornerstones of Granite's arguments for approval. Granite had no choice but to ignore all hard data and studies that show the true supply picture. They'd hoped we'd never find out. We and our consultants did the research and found out what Granite should have told us. The Department of Conservation study cited in Special Report 153 says that for San Diego County alone, there are 5.7 billion tons of aggregate resources. Remember that Granite is saying that 70% of their aggregate will go to San Diego County. Additionally, other studies like the California Geological Survey indicate that not yet identified resources could exceed 10 times that. So isn't it curious, to say the least, that Granite feels they have to be San Diego's aggregate savior? So why aren't there countless mines approved in San Diego County? Well, it's a good question. Leaders there have said they won't approve them because they're too politically sensitive. Really? So I suppose neither Granite nor San Diego County's leaders think that Riverside County is smart enough to realize those same or greater sensitivities exist here in this particular location. Again, I find that very offensive. What about Riverside County's supply of aggregate? Western Riverside County is a major exporter of aggregate and is well served by its existing mines. Mines that stretch all along I-15 through Corona that will lose some of their business and accompanying sales tax generation if Granite's application is approved. Finally, there's the very recent joint Sandag and Caltrans comprehensive 120-page study, San Diego Region Aggregate Supply Study, reviewed by 50 experts, including Granite's own people, which says, and I'm quoting, San Diego County is very rich in its own aggregate resources. It also states San Diego has ample resources of the necessary rock types to meet the anticipated future aggregate demand. Regardless of the myth that granite is trying to create, there is no aggregate shortage in Riverside County and abundant resources in San Diego County to meet their own needs. What about the economic impact? This is the strangest contradiction of all. Granite is asking us to believe their economic study that includes only the positives and doesn't even make a half-hearted attempt to look at the other side of the ledger. We should be more offended by that than anything else they're saying or doing. Just slip it past them and they'll never notice. Well, we noticed. The city of Temecula, on the other hand, knew that if we were going to challenge their study, we had to do it in the most professional way that left no room for doubt. So we hired the experts at the Rose Institute at Claremont McKenna College. Their credentials and reputation are impeccable, and they're recognized amongst the highest levels of economists in the nation. You've already heard, and I know now you have or are getting a copy of that comprehensive report. It clearly demonstrates that the negative economic effects of Liberty Quarry will be staggering, except of course to granite construction. And finally, truck trip reduction. Granite and their consultants know very well that many of their environmental claims hinge on the deceptive notion that truck trips will be reduced. They also knew that they had to pull out all the stops, smoke and mirrors really, to get us to believe their claims. Standard practices in evaluating traffic wouldn't get them their desired conclusion, so they abandoned them in favor of whatever would get them where they needed to go. Any traffic study is only as good as the underlying assumptions, and theirs frankly are ludicrous. Like basing everything on a one-day manual traffic count without even bothering to find out where those truck trips are starting and ending. Like claiming that rock trucks in western Riverside County bypass the mines in Lake Elsinore and the Temecula Valley District for longer trips to San Bernardino and Irwindale, or even 100 miles to the Coachella Valley. This while at the same time saying that granite will come from sources closest to the end user. Like totally neglecting the unavoidable impacts to all Interstate 15 off-ramps and on-ramps. Further, this mine will significantly and unavoidably impact all of Temecula's freeway ramps, and yet despite the city's many objections and comments, the traffic study fails to include the intersections, roadways, and already congested freeway segments that will be so seriously impacted. Why? Granite needed these false conclusions to sway the opinions of other regions to support their project. Sure, we'll reduce truck trips through your city, so why don't you go ahead and support us? And if you don't, we'll say you did anyway, just as they did with the city of Hemet, whose mayor had to write a letter refuting Granite's claim that his city had voted to support them. With so many choices for where granite quarries could be permitted, it is beyond comprehension that this, among the most sensitive sites in all of Southern California, should be considered. If it doesn't work for anybody but granite construction, that cannot be considered sufficient grounds for approval. The city of Temecula asks nothing more from this commission than to remain open to the facts that we have presented and to make your recommendation based on those truths. Thank you.
I have no other speaker slips from the city of Temecula. Is there anyone else wishing to speak from the city? Later, okay. We've also got 10 minutes, about 9 minutes to 12, and I really don't want to disjoint the San Diego State presentations. So I think we'll adjourn for lunch early and start with San Diego State immediately after lunch.
So 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock. 1 o'clock.